The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of light, just another splash of green among so many. But when I knelt beside that mossy outcrop, I knew immediately this was something different. The leaves were narrow, glaucous, almost metallic in their sheen, and the delicate purple veins seemed to pulse faintly in the filtered sunlight. I'd been cataloguing alpine flora for years, but nothing like this. It was a single rosette clinging to the very edge of a crumbling stream bank, half its roots dangling in the air where the soil had already fallen away. The water below rushed fast and cold, cutting deeper with each passing minute. One more storm and the plant would be gone, washed downstream, lost forever. The air smelled of wet stone and decaying leaves. I crouched low, steadying myself with a gloved hand in the mud. My heart was beating as if I'd stumbled upon a living relic, a survivor from an older world. I pulled out my field journal and made a quick sketch: leaf pattern, petal structure, root arrangement. I'd seen illustrations in dusty reference books of a species thought extinct since the 1940s, Gentiana solivaga, the wandering gentian. But those old plates were black and white, uncertain. Seeing it alive before me felt impossible. I glanced upstream where the narrow valley curved toward the ridgeline. No trail here, no markers. I'd bushwhacked nearly 6 miles from camp to reach this forgotten tributary, chasing rumours of rare sedges. The light was already tilting westward, the day thinning into gold. My radio was back in camp, no service this far out anyway. I was utterly alone, except for that trembling little miracle rooted in the mud. I pressed a finger gently near its base. The soil sloughed away in grains. The bank wouldn't last the night if the weather turned, and the clouds building over the ridge suggested exactly that. A low growl of thunder rolled faintly through the ravine. I could dig around the roots, lift it out and try to transplant it to safer ground, perhaps even back to the university's alpine greenhouse. But collection of endangered species was strictly forbidden without a permit. Doing so could cost me my license, maybe worse. Yet if I left it here, the next rain would take it. I sat back on my heels, the damp seeping through my pants, and watched the plant tremble in the wind. The ethical codes I'd sworn to follow clashed with the raw instinct to save it. Every botanist dreams of discovery, but few are cursed to find one balanced so close to death. I remember whispering aloud, "What do you want me to do?" as if the gentian might answer. The only reply was the hiss of the stream gnawing at the earth below. When the first drops began to fall, I made my decision. Or maybe the storm made it for me. The rain came in steady sheets, fine at first, then heavier until it was a grey curtain that blurred the valley walls. I pulled my poncho from my pack, but even as I fumbled it over my shoulders, I saw the waterline rising. The gentle trickle beneath the gentian had turned into a small torrent, tearing at the bank with a hunger that made my stomach twist. I had maybe an hour before that entire ledge would give way. Every training manual, every code of ethics, every lecture from my mentors whispered in my head: observe, record, do not interfere. But this wasn't a textbook. This was a living, breathing thing, one that might represent the last of its kind. Lightning flashed somewhere up the ridge, the smell of ozone mixed with wet humus and crushed fern. I knelt again, tracing the slope of the root ball with my fingers, trying to judge how deep it went. It wasn't much, thin tendrils spread wide rather than deep. The plant had adapted to survive on poor soil, anchoring itself wherever it could, but adaptation wouldn't save it from erosion. My pack was soaked, but I pulled out my trowel and the small cloth wrap I used for samples. I hesitated, staring at the trembling stems. My gloves were slick with mud, and I could feel my pulse in my ears. I thought of the permit process back at the university, the layers of bureaucracy, the waiting, the forms. Even if I reported the location today, a field team might not reach it for weeks. The gentian didn't have that long. Another rumble of thunder rolled through the canyon. I took a deep breath and began to dig, carefully, gently tracing the roots with my fingertips so as not to tear them. The earth was soft, almost fluid now, and every scoop of mud brought the plant closer to freedom, or to ruin if I faltered. Water pooled around my knees, and I could hear the bank collapsing inches away. A quiet sigh, followed by the gurgle of surrender as clods of dirt dropped into the stream below. When the plant finally came loose, it felt fragile as breath in my hands. The roots glistened pale against the dark sky. I wrapped them in the damp cloth, tucking it carefully into a small container meant for pressed specimens. My heart pounded with both triumph and guilt. I'd crossed a line, and there was no undoing it now. I found a higher spot under the overhang of a rock ledge, just enough shelter to protect it from the worst of the rain. There, I dug a small cradle in the soil, temporary refuge, until I could decide what to do next. I pressed the roots into the cool earth and firmed the mud around them, whispering half to myself, half to the plant, "Hold on, just hold on." As I sat back, soaked and shivering, I looked down at the stream roaring below, carrying bits of the old bank away. Where the gentian had stood, only a scar of raw clay remained. My decision had come not from logic, but instinct, and now that the rush of adrenaline was fading, the weight of what I'd done settled heavy in my chest. I was no longer just an observer. I had intervened in the story of a species, and I couldn't know if I'd saved it or doomed it. When dawn came, it crept slow and pale through the mist, turning the world into shades of grey and green. I hadn't slept. My small camp beneath the rock ledge had become a patchwork of damp gear and muddy footprints. The rain had stopped sometime before midnight, but the stream below still roared with swollen pride, gorged on everything the mountain had offered it. I crawled out from under my tarp and peered over the edge. The bank where I'd first found the gentian was gone, erased clean, as though it had never existed. For a long while I just stood there, the morning chill biting through my damp clothes. I looked at the little mound where I'd replanted the gentian, the leaves glistening faintly with dew. It looked alive. Not vibrant, not thriving, but surviving. The petals, delicate as silk, were folded tight, protecting their colour from the cold. I brushed a thumb gently across one leaf, and for a fleeting second, I thought it leaned toward the touch. Maybe just the wind, but in that moment I felt an irrational surge of hope. I made some tea over a small camp stove, steam curling into the fog. My thoughts wrestled themselves into knots. I could document everything, take photographs, submit my notes anonymously, but even that felt risky. Unauthorized relocation of a protected species was a serious offence, even if done in good faith. Still, what kind of scientist watches a species die because the paperwork takes too long? I flipped open my field journal, pages warped and stained from the night's rain. My sketches from yesterday stared back at me, lines drawn in haste. Trembling with excitement, I added new notes. Transplanted to stable soil, west-facing slope, approximately 40 metres above stream level, root structure intact. Then, almost as an afterthought, I wrote in small letters at the bottom of the page, "Acted on instinct." The fog began to lift as the sun reached the valley floor, and with it came a strange stillness. Every drop of water on every fern, pine needle and mossy stone sparkled like glass. Nature, indifferent to my turmoil, simply went on. The air was heavy with that scent that only follows a mountain storm, earth and pine and renewal. I packed my gear, but before leaving, I crouched beside the gentian once more. "You're on your own now," I murmured, as though it could hear me. I didn't know whether to feel proud or ashamed. The world is full of forgotten species, tiny, beautiful survivors clinging to the edge of existence. Maybe this one had found a second chance, or maybe I had only interrupted its rightful ending. I left a small marker, just a stack of 3 flat stones, inconspicuous to anyone who didn't know to look. Then I turned toward the ridge, my boots squelching in the wet soil. Every few steps I fought the urge to turn back, but I knew that to linger would only deepen the doubt. Somewhere up there, where the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, lay the trail back to camp, to my notes, to whatever consequences waited for me. Behind me, the stream kept its song, endless, patient, and unconcerned. By the time I reached camp, the sun had broken through for good, burning the last threads of mist from the valley. My tent steamed faintly in the morning light, and the meadow around it shimmered with dew. I hung my gear on a low branch and stood for a long time just listening. The river far below, a raven calling from the ridge, the faint sigh of wind through wet spruce. It should have been peaceful, but my thoughts churned as restlessly as that swollen stream. I brewed another pot of tea and sat on a flat rock near the fire ring, notebook open across my knees. Every scientific instinct told me to record the coordinates, to file a formal report. If Gentiana Solivaga truly survived, it needed official recognition, protection, and a management plan. But that meant telling the story of how it had come to be where it was and what I'd done to it. There was no way to separate the two. I thought about past field discoveries, rare orchids hidden in limestone sinkholes, tiny alpine violets clinging to scree slopes. Each time, the protocol was clear: collect data, submit photos, await review. But this felt different. I hadn't just documented, I'd interfered. The rules existed for a reason. Countless collectors before me had loved rare plants to death. The rational voice in my head, my mentors, my training, kept saying, "You compromised the integrity of the find." But another voice, softer and older, whispered back, "You saved a life." After lunch, I started back down the narrow deer trail toward the creek, unable to resist checking one more time. The air was cooler in the ravine, rich with the smell of wet cedar and silt. The ground squished underfoot, and I could see where the flood had carved new channels overnight. When I reached the little ledge, I half expected to find the transplant washed away, but there it was, still standing. A little bent from the rain, but upright. The sight made something unclench inside me. I crouched nearby, careful not to disturb the soil. A pair of tiny black beetles crawled along one of the lower leaves, their bodies gleaming like obsidian. I smiled despite myself. The plant had already found company. Nature wastes no time filling a niche. I took a single photograph, just one, close enough to show the distinctive veining, not enough to reveal the landscape. That image, and my notes, would be all the evidence I'd risk. Back at camp, I sealed the camera and notebook in a dry bag. I'd wait until I was home to decide how much to share. The ethics board might never forgive the breach, but silence had its own cost. If no one knew this gentian existed, how long before the next flood took the valley entirely? That night, I built a small fire. The wood hissed with leftover rain, and the smoke drifted lazily toward the darkening sky. I sat beside it, damp boots off, and watched sparks spiral upward until they disappeared. The wilderness hummed around, me alive, indifferent, and vast. Somewhere below, a single fragile plant was holding on. I wondered if it felt the same kind of defiance I did. As the stars began to emerge, I made myself a quiet promise. If it survived the season, I'd return. Permits or not, I'd find a way to make sure it wasn't alone again. 2 months later, autumn returned to the mountains, and with it came me, boots heavier with mud, conscience heavier still. The air was sharp, with that dry, resinous scent of turning needles and cold rock. I'd filed a report after all, though not a full confession. I sent the data anonymously, habitat notes, altitude, description, even a photo, but omitted the coordinates. Enough to spark attention, but not enough to lead anyone straight there. Since then, I'd lived with a gnawing uncertainty. Had the gentian survived? Or had I simply delayed the inevitable? The hike back was long and strangely silent. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing, the forest holding its breath beneath the weight of coming frost. When I reached the high ravine, I stopped where the trail faded into slope and scanned the valley below. The floodplain looked different now, scoured and reshaped by the season's storms. Fallen trunks crisscrossed the stream like bones. My heart sank. I almost turned back. Then I saw it, a flicker of colour against the grey rock, just a trace, a faint shimmer of silver green and violet. I scrambled down, slipping twice on the wet clay until I was close enough to be sure. The gentian was still there. Not only alive, but blooming. 3 new rosettes spread from its base, their buds small but determined. It wasn't just surviving, it was growing. I knelt beside it, laughter rising in my chest before I could stop it. The relief came so strong, it almost hurt. Around the plant, the soil had firmed, perhaps from the roots binding themselves deeper. Even the beetles were back, crawling in the same slow rhythm as before. Nature, it seemed, had quietly accepted my interference and made the best of it. I stayed there for hours, sketching, writing, tracing the slope of the valley in my notebook. The guilt that had haunted me for weeks began to ease, replaced by something humbler, quieter. I hadn't broken nature's law, I had merely participated in it, however clumsily. Sometimes preservation means stepping back. Sometimes it means daring to act before the clock runs out. The line between the two isn't drawn in ink. It's scratched in mud, washed and redrawn by every passing storm. As the light faded, I set a small, flat stone beside the plant, a marker, nothing more, and whispered, "You're not forgotten." Then I shouldered my pack and began the climb out. The wind rose behind me, tugging at the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain. Back at the ridge, I turned for one last look. The valley lay in shadow now, but in that dimness, I thought I saw the gentian's leaves catch a final glint of light, as though nodding. In quiet approval, I smiled, letting the moment settle like the first cool breath of winter. By the time I reached the trailhead, the stars were already out, and though the world below remained wild, uncertain, and fragile as ever, I felt, for the first time in months, at peace. Some lives, I realised, don't need saving so much as witnessing.